Everyone's talking about an attack on the power grid. What happens if hackers shut down our electricity? What will we do if the grid goes down? And these are legitimate concerns. But while we've all been watching the electrical grid, someone's been attacking something we need even more: our water.
12 states. That's how many U.S. water utilities have been hacked in the past week. And 2 of them are right here in New Jersey. To be clear, nobody's tap water got poisoned and nothing got shut off. This is about who's controlling the systems behind the scenes and how easily they got in.
In just 48 hours, more than 30 community water systems in Minnesota were targeted in what state officials called a coordinated cyber attack. One water treatment plant was actually entirely knocked offline. Then Michigan announced that 9 of its water systems had also been attacked. And now the FBI is investigating attacks on water systems across multiple states. Now, nobody was poisoned in these attacks. As far as officials know, the drinking water remains safe, but that doesn't make this story less concerning, because this demonstrated something that every one of us should be paying attention to. They can get in. And this isn't the first time. We've seen hackers gain access to equipment used to control American water infrastructure before. We've seen them interfere with pumps and controls. Several years ago, authorities in Florida reported an incident where someone remotely accessed a water treatment computer and attempted to increase the amount of a caustic chemical in the water by more than 100 times the normal limit. Fortunately, someone noticed, someone saw it happening. But what happens when someone doesn't, when no one notices? And maybe an even more important question: how long could contaminated water be coming out of your faucet before you even knew something was wrong? Because today I want to show you 2 incredibly simple things that I think every household should be doing. 2 things that could keep your family safe. And neither one requires living in fear, because there's a big difference between fear and awareness. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. We spend a lot of time preparing for power outages. We buy generators, we store fuel, we buy solar power stations, battery banks, all the things. We figure out how we're going to cook and keep our freezer cold if the power goes out. And we should. But here's something worth putting into perspective. If my electricity goes out tomorrow, I'm going to be inconvenienced. Depending on the time of year, I might be very inconvenienced, but I can survive without electricity. I actually lived without it most of my childhood, and we did just fine. I can't survive without safe water. And throughout human history, unsafe water has killed an enormous number of people. Even today, with modern medicine and modern water treatment technology, the World Health Organization estimates that about 1.4 million deaths in a single year could have been prevented with adequate water, sanitation, and hygiene. And more than 1 million of those deaths were associated with diarrheal disease. Dehydration kills quickly. So water isn't just another utility. It's critical infrastructure in the most literal sense of the word. And somebody's been testing just how vulnerable that infrastructure is.
Why are water and wastewater systems being specifically targeted right now by this cyber action? Like, why not the power grid of a massive area?
A couple different reasons, but in particular water, you've got a lot of legacy systems. Unfortunately, it's all connected to the internet these days, so it allows attackers a conduit to get in there and, again, control valves and do things. And it's a little bit different. Oftentimes we think, well, are they going to poison the water or do this or that? They don't have to. All they need to do is disrupt things, control the flow, stop it, this and that causes major panic. Just the fact that they could get in and take over and manipulate these things. And as they dug in deeper and deeper into the research, we see that they manipulated the IP addresses, they confiscated passwords, and were able to close accounts and take over administration privileges so they can control a lot of things. The red flags all went up and panic sets in because, again, they're all remote control. There's not a lot of people controlling the valves and the levers anymore. It's all done over the internet.
On July 26th and 27th, more than 30 community water systems across Minnesota were targeted in a coordinated cyber attack. And let's be very clear here. This wasn't just somebody hacking into like the website where you might pay your water bill. These attacks involved what's called operational technology. That's technology used to monitor and control the actual physical water infrastructure, pumps, wells, water towers, treatment equipment, automated controls. In the small city of Bram, Minnesota, the attack temporarily shut down the operating controls for the city's well and water treatment plant. And for a period of time, that community was relying on the water that was already sitting in their water tower, and the residents were asked to conserve water. In Plymouth, Minnesota, communications equipment associated with the water system was disrupted. Unfortunately, the workers were able to fall back on contingency procedures and manual controls. And again, there's no evidence that the drinking water was actually contaminated. That's important. But then Michigan disclosed that the water systems there had also been attacked. And now the FBI is investigating a wave of cyber attacks across at least 7 states. There's been a lot of speculation that Iranian-linked hackers could be responsible because of patterns of previous attacks and recent federal warnings. But as of the time that I'm actually recording this, investigators haven't publicly established who was responsible for this latest wave of attacks. But whoever did it, they got in. And this isn't the first time. This is where this story gets a little more concerning, because this isn't some brand new hypothetical vulnerability that nobody thought about until last week. Back in 2023 and 2024, Iranian government-affiliated hackers known as the Cyber Avengers compromised internet-connected programmable controllers, basically little computers like used to control physical equipment. According to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the attackers compromised at least 75 devices, and at least 34 of those were at American water and wastewater facilities. And do you know how they got into some of them? Default passwords. Some of these systems still had the factory default passwords enabled, and others apparently had no password at all. Think about that for a second. We are talking about equipment that's connected to critical infrastructure, and in some cases, the digital equivalent of the front door was basically just sitting there unlocked. And this problem hasn't disappeared. The EPA reported earlier this year that during 2025, it identified cybersecurity vulnerabilities at 277 water systems. Some of these vulnerabilities involved technology controlling actual drinking water and wastewater processes. So this isn't science fiction, and it's not a movie plot. It's an acknowledged vulnerability in American critical infrastructure. And there's another incident you might remember, because this one made national news, and I've actually talked about it on the channel quite a few times before. In February 2021, officials in Oldsmar, Florida reported that someone had remotely accessed a computer at that city's water treatment plant. An employee there that morning actually watched the mouse on his computer moving on its own. And according to authorities at the time, whoever had control of that computer changed the setting for sodium hydroxide, which is also known as lye. Now, sodium hydroxide, it is legitimately used in water treatment in controlled small amounts, but apparently this setting was changed from approximately 100 parts per million to over 11,000 parts per million. So that was more than 100 times the normal setting. Now, thankfully, this was caught and it was immediately changed back to normal. But here's why I still think Oldsmar matters. The controls existed and they could be remotely accessed, and somebody sitting in front of a computer somewhere else was able to manipulate it. And that vulnerability is the part that I care about. It's the part we all need to care about. And now we get to the question that nobody can really answer yet. What were these latest attackers trying to accomplish? Were they simply trying to cause a disruption? Were they demonstrating what they could access? Were they mapping vulnerabilities? Were they testing defenses? Was this a dry run for something much bigger? We don't know that it was, but we also don't know that it wasn't. And preparedness has never been about predicting exactly what's going to happen next. It's about recognizing vulnerabilities before they become your next emergency. And this is where I want to make an important distinction. There's a difference between fear and awareness, a difference between vigilance and ignorance. Awareness is understanding that our water infrastructure can fail. It can fail because of a cyber attack. It could fail because of a broken water main, flooding, some kind of power outage. It could become contaminated with bacteria or parasites. We've definitely been talking about cyclospora quite a bit lately. And sometimes, I dare say, probably most of the time, you're not going to know there's a problem right away. In our little town right here, we've actually had bowl notices several times in recent memory. And usually by the time that a lot of people have heard about it, it's actually been a while since it was issued and no one was the wiser. And depending on what the issue is with the water, that could mean big, big trouble. If you drink that water before the alarm is sounded, or before you become aware that there's been an alarm, or even possibly before the problem's even detected. So being aware means asking, what can I do now that gives me another layer of protection? And there's two things that we do that I think make an enormous amount of sense. Number one, stop storing your water filter. Hopefully you have some water filtration methods on hand. Maybe you've got one of those big stainless steel gravity water filters sitting in a closet or down in your basement. Just part of your emergency preparedness plan. Get it out, set it up, learn how to use it, and use the thing. Whether you have an Alexapure, a Berkey, a WaterPure, or something else, you should definitely know how to use it, how long a filter lasts you, how to replace those filters, and what your particular filter actually removes. And I really want to emphasize that last part, because not all water filters are created equal. And no water filter should just be assumed to remove everything. I mean, some are very good at removing microorganisms. Some remove certain chemicals, heavy metals. There's carbon filters, there's ceramic filters. There's systems that use ultrafiltration or nanofiber technology, reverse osmosis. So look at the actual testing for the filter you have. Don't just look at the word purifier printed on the box and assume that that means it's going to protect you against everything that could possibly end up in your water. For example, Cyclospora, that explosive diarrhea parasite that everyone's been talking about recently, those are roughly 8 to 10 microns in diameter, and Cryptosporidium, which is another dangerous waterborne parasite, is even smaller than that. So a properly functioning filter that's validated for protozoan cyst removal at an appropriate size should provide a meaningful physical barrier against organisms of that size. And some of these newer filters go considerably further than that. We're actually looking at a nanofilter system that uses electropositive nanofiber filtration along with carbon media. So it's designed to capture extremely small contaminants while still maintaining a pretty high flow rate, because that's something else you need to think about. But even a really good expensive filter has limitations, because removing a parasite or a bacterium or a virus is very different from removing a chemical that's completely dissolved in the water. And that brings us right back to Oldsmar, Florida. Remember that sodium hydroxide, the lye? Once that's dissolved in water, it separates into dissolved ions, and that's very different from trying to physically capture an 8 to 10 micron parasite. An ordinary countertop gravity filter probably can't turn that into safe drinking water. And I also wouldn't want to pour seriously chemically contaminated water through my good emergency filter, because I would never trust that filter to function properly again afterwards. Depending on the chemical, the concentration, and the filter media, you could potentially damage or contaminate the filter that you're relying on. So sometimes the correct response to contaminated water is not filter it. Sometimes it has to be do not use that water. And that's a really big part of why I don't consider filtration my entire water preparedness plan. Of course, there's many, many reasons for that, but water filtration is only one layer. Now, the next part of this is ridiculously simple, but all of these examples have made me realize how well this actually can protect us. Our water storage plan creates a built-in time buffer between our water supply and us. We use a water cooler in our house. I mean, I love having not only the cold water, but we use one that actually also dispenses hot water, which for me is even a bigger draw than the cold, for things like tea, for instant soup and oatmeal, all the things. We've never had water delivered for our water cooler like some people do. Years ago, when I discovered that I could buy the empty 5-gallon water cooler jugs, I slowly started buying them and stockpiling them just kind of 1 or 2 at a time, just to keep the cost manageable. And I would fill them myself, either with filtered water or spring water from a nearby spring. And I just kept buying more, just 1 or 2 at a time. I fill them, I store them, and then we actually use them on our water cooler. When the water cooler runs empty, I go grab the oldest jug from my stored supply, and I clean out and refill the other one and put it back at the back of the rotation. So it's basically a first in, first out inventory for water. And think about how quickly that can add up. 10 of those 5-gallon bottles gives you 50 gallons of water, and 20 gives you 100 gallons. I can usually get jugs that are designed to stack one on top of another. You can also get racks to store them in, or you can build racks yourself even. So they're not too bad to store. Of course, it's generally recommended to store at least 1 gallon per person per day for at least 3 days. That is the bare minimum. But if possible, a 2-week supply is much preferable. And then for home-filled containers, ones you filled yourself, it's recommended to replace that water that you filled them with fresh water every 6 months. Now, you can also use a water preserver to extend that out to up to 5 years. But because we're actually using our stored water, ours is continually rotating, which is exactly what we should all be doing. So I haven't had to use a water preserver in those jugs, and we have not had any issues. We also store some smaller containers of water as well for grab and go, because if we needed to evacuate or anything like that, 5-gallon jugs are not super portable. We started stockpiling 20-year long-term storage water in quart-sized bottles. It's guaranteed bacteria-free and triple sealed. That way we don't have to worry about the rotation with those, because we just weren't going through those cases of little bottles from the supermarket fast enough. Those were getting wasted, because for everyday drinking, we use the water cooler water and refillable like Owala water bottles. Now, here's the part that suddenly becomes really interesting when we're talking about water contamination and cyber attacks. The water I'm drinking today and using today is not the water that came out of my faucet today. And so think about what that means. Let's say something happened Monday morning, some contaminant entered the municipal water system. Nobody realizes there's a problem immediately. And maybe on Tuesday they discover it. There's testing and there's that whole process of figuring out what's going on. And then after that, then the warning goes out. So if I've been drinking straight out of my faucet, I've already drunk Monday's water. We are already in trouble. But if the water I'm drinking is coming from a jug that I filled weeks or months earlier, I've created a buffer. Once I know when the problem began, I can identify any jugs that were filled during that questionable period, set those aside, or discard the water or whatever. You have to make sure that you're dating them. So write the date that you filled them on like a piece of masking tape or something like that, stick it to the jug, and then you know exactly when that water came from. Meanwhile, I still have all of the older water as well. I have plenty of water stored, so I'm not scrambling. Is it a foolproof system? Of course not. But it's just another layer between my family and the municipal water system. And I didn't have to build an underground cistern or spend thousands and thousands of dollars to create it. And here's why I really like this system. Because think about what we're accomplishing at the same time. I'm not buying 100 gallons of emergency water and shoving it into a corner of my basement and just hoping that I remember to replace it someday. I'm using it. 5-gallon water cooler jugs are much more convenient and realistic for everyday use than a 50-gallon tank, for instance, or even like a water brick or something like that. My emergency supply is part of my everyday life. The water gets rotated brainlessly, which is my favorite way. I know where everything is, I know how much water I have, and I know how long it takes me to go through that with like daily use. And if there's suddenly a problem with the municipal water supply, I don't have to immediately start figuring out what I'm going to drink. I've already got it and I'm already used to using it. That buys me time. And sometimes time is one of the most valuable things that preparedness can give you. You don't have to have a water cooler to do this. If you don't have one, you don't want one, or you don't maybe have the space or the budget for one, there's all kinds of different options. You can get a pump that you could put on top of those 5-gallon jugs. You can get anything from a simple manual pump that's very inexpensive to a rechargeable battery operated pump or tap. They're not even very expensive. We actually have one that we use to dispense water into our Keurig machine since it's not near the sink. The jug sits down beside the buffet and the tap sits up on the buffet, and there's like a tube that connects them. It's pretty cool. You can also get a simple gravity stand. It sits on your countertop. It holds a jug upside down, has a spigot, so it'll dispense the water. There's no heating or cooling with that, but it does make it a lot easier to use those 5-gallon jugs. And then there's, of course, the electric water coolers, all sorts of different variations of those. I'm going to put examples of all these things I've mentioned down below the video so you can see what I'm talking about. One thing to think about, lots of the coolers, the water coolers you see today, they have a bottom mount. It means the bottom goes underneath, like right side up, and it's a lot easier to reload those than the traditional setup with the bottle inverted on the top. But those are going to require electricity to dispense the water through a pump of some sort. So I actually prefer the traditional type where the bottle goes on top, and those should still dispense your water during a power outage or a grid down. It's not going to heat or cool, but it should dispense the room temperature water. So if you have the other type, the bottom load, you're going to still want to make sure that you have a manual or a battery operated pump or a gravity stand or something like that on hand. You could also do something similar to this system with gallon size jugs, but for me, the 5-gallon size is perfect. It's easy enough to manage, but it's big enough that I'm not constantly running down for another jug if I was using gallons. But I have actually also found like 2 or 3 gallon jugs that are similar. So that's another option if you can find those. And this brings me right back to what I said earlier about fear. Because really, what's the downside here? If nobody ever attacks the water system, I still have filtered drinking water. If there's never another cyber attack on an American water utility, I still have an emergency water supply. If a storm knocks out power to the pumps, I've got water. If a pipe breaks, there's a boil water advisory. If a well pump fails, I've got water. If there is another contamination event, I have water that was stored before it happens. And that's preparedness. You're not sitting around afraid that something terrible is going to happen. You're recognizing that things occasionally do go wrong, and you're arranging your life so that when they do, you've got options. And you're not going to end up a casualty, because this is the new modern warfare and we are all at risk. Protect yourself. That's not fear. That is being proactive. It's being vigilant. It's being aware of what's going on around you and taking reasonable steps to guard against the worst possibilities. There's one more thing that I really want people to understand. A boil water advisory and a do not drink advisory are not the same thing. Boiling is extremely useful when the concern is microorganisms, but boiling doesn't magically remove every chemical contaminant. So if something happens in your community, don't just automatically think, I'll just boil my water. You have to actually listen to what your water authority is actually telling you. And if the officials tell you not to drink the water, use your stored safe water until they've identified what's going on and told you what treatment is appropriate, if any. And this gets back to something that I mentioned earlier. There can be a gap between when something goes wrong and when you find out about it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody did anything wrong. Something has to happen before anybody can discover that it happened. And then someone has to recognize that there's a problem. And then sometimes samples have to be taken, have to be tested. Officials have to determine what warning is appropriate, and you know how that can go. And then that information has to reach you somehow. The problem comes first, the notification comes afterward, and there's always going to be a gap between those two things. Preparedness helps fill that gap. I don't know who was behind these latest attacks. I don't know whether they were simply trying to cause disruption or they were demonstrating their power, what they could access, if they were mapping out vulnerabilities. And I certainly don't know whether anybody will ever successfully contaminate an American drinking water supply through a cyber attack. But here's what I do know. More than 30 water systems in one state were targeted within 48 hours, and then the attacks continued. We know that attackers have compromised industrial controllers at American water facilities before. And we know that they're still finding cybersecurity vulnerabilities in water systems today. And that's enough information for me to pay attention. Not to be afraid, but to be aware, because there's a difference between fear and awareness. Fear leaves you staring at the problem, worrying. Awareness makes you do something about it. Filter the water you drink, know what your filter can and can't remove, build up some stored water, rotate through it so it doesn't become some forgotten emergency supply sitting in a corner that you wouldn't feel comfortable using when you really needed it. And give yourself that buffer between something going wrong and you finding out that something is wrong. Because when it comes to something as essential as water, I'd much rather have that buffer and never need it than need it and realize that I never created one. As always, look down below the video to find links to resources that I mentioned today, other resources to help you build your preparedness the right way, and also any coupon codes or discounts that I have to help you do it for less. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a computer emoji down below. And I'm going to put a video right up here that's going to help you continue your preparedness journey. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.